Come closer. Sit down and listen carefully, because tonight I am not going to invent anything. Not a single word. Everything I am about to tell you really happened on a small farm in Bavaria just over a century ago in the spring. The police investigated for more than 40 years. They questioned more than 100 suspects. And to this day, no one knows who slaughtered the family of Hinterkaifeck. But that is not the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part is what the killer did after the murders. Stay with me. You will understand. Hinterkaifeck is not a village. It is a farm. A single farm. Set at the end of a dirt track some 40 miles north of Munich, wedged between the fields and the dark edge of a forest. The nearest neighbour is too far away to hear a scream. At night, out there is only the wind, the creaking of wood, and the dark. Total dark. 6 people live on this farm. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, 63 years old. A hard man, closed off, whom nobody in the hamlet truly likes. His wife, Cecilia, 72. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35, a widow. Her husband, Karl, fell in the trenches at Arras during the Great War. At least, that is what they say. Because his body was never found. Remember that detail. Victoria has 2 children. A little girl of 7, named Cecilia like her grandmother, and a baby, Joseph, 2 years old. And on that very day, the 6th person arrives at the farm, a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44. She starts work that morning. By evening, she will be dead. But before I tell you about that night, there is something you need to know. This family is hiding a secret. A heavy, filthy secret documented by the courts. 7 years before the murders, Andreas, the father, and his own daughter Victoria were convicted by a tribunal for incest. And there is a doubt, a terrible doubt, about the identity of little Joseph's real father. The hatred in that house may not have come only from outside. The investigators will learn this later. For now, keep your eyes on the farm, because something outside has begun to move closer. It all starts about 6 months before the killings. The maid at the time, a young woman named Crescent, suddenly quits her job. She is terrified. She says she hears noises in the house. Footsteps. Footsteps coming from the attic at night while everyone is asleep. She is convinced the farm is haunted. She leaves. She will never come back. And the farm stays without a maid until Maria arrives on the day of the murders. And then, in the days before the tragedy, things speed up. Andreas, the old farmer, tells his neighbours a series of events that make no sense at all. First, he finds a newspaper on his farm. A Munich daily. Except he never bought it. Nobody in the hamlet subscribes to that paper. Someone brought it. Someone came inside. Then a key to the house disappears. Just like that. It evaporates. It will never be found. Then, at night, Andreas hears footsteps. Above his head. In the attic. Exactly like the old maid. He climbs up, a lamp in his hand, his heart pounding. He searches. There is no one. Nothing. The attic is empty. But it is the last sign that freezes the blood. A few days before the murders, after a fresh fall of snow, Andreas discovers footprints. Human tracks coming out of the forest, crossing the field and leading up to the farm. Up to the door of the machine shed, whose lock has been forced. And there, Andreas notices something impossible. The tracks lead toward the farm, but not one of them leads away. Not one. Whoever walked through that snow came out of the forest, approached the house, and never left. Andreas tells his neighbors all of it. The footsteps in the attic, the newspaper, the key, the tracks in the snow. And yet he does not call the police. He does not run. He does nothing. 4 days later, he and his entire family will be dead. It is the evening of the last Friday of March. Night falls on Hinterkaifeck, and someone is waiting, crouched in the dark of the barn. We will never know exactly how it happened, but here is what the investigation pieced together. One by one, the people of the farm are drawn toward the barn. First old Andreas, then his wife Cecilia, then Victoria, then little Cecilia, 7 years old. One after another, they step through the barn door into the darkness. And one after another, they take a violent blow to the head. The weapon is a mattock, a heavy grubbing hoe belonging to the family themselves. The killer did not even bring his own weapon. He used theirs. Then he goes into the house. He kills little Joseph, 2 years old, in his cot. And he kills Maria, the maid, in her room. Maria, who had arrived that very morning, who knew no one, who had done nothing, dead on her first evening. And there is a detail the coroners uncovered, and which still haunts everyone who knows this case. Little Cecilia, 7 years old, did not die instantly. The autopsy established it. Lying in the straw of the barn, beside the bodies of her mother and her grandparents, the child survived. 4 hours. Conscious. Alone, in the dark, wounded. And in her despair, in her pain, she tore out her own hair in handfuls. They found it, clutched in her small hands. 4 hours. That is already an atrocious story. But if that were all, it would be one more murder. What makes Hinterkaifeck unique, what makes it one of the most disturbing cases in criminal history, is what happens next. Because the killer does not run. The killer stays. For about 3 days, after killing 6 people, the murderer lives on the farm, with the bodies. The investigators are certain of it, because the evidence is there, everywhere. The livestock had been fed and cared for. The animals, found several days later, were in good condition. Someone looked after them. Food had been eaten in the kitchen. Bread had gone. And the chimney kept smoking. 2 days after the murders, a neighbor named Michael sees smoke rising from the roof of Hinterkaifeck. He thinks nothing of it. The family is home, they are keeping warm, except the family has been dead for 2 days. That neighbor even thought he saw a figure and a lamp raised toward him in the night, dazzling him, as if to keep him at a distance. He went home. Imagine it. For 3 days and 3 nights someone slept under that roof, ate at that table, warmed himself at that fire, fed the animals in the morning, while in the barn and in the bedrooms 6 corpses slowly went cold. Who does that? What kind of human being slaughters an entire family, then quietly moves into their home, does the farm chores, as if taking their place? The investigators never understood it. Some of them came to a terrible conclusion. That the killer perhaps had nowhere else to go. That, from the very beginning, this was what he wanted. Not to kill in order to steal. To kill in order to stay. 3 days. And then, one morning, without anyone seeing him, that person left. And vanished into thin air. It is only 4 days after the murders, late in the afternoon, that the horror is discovered. The neighbors are worried. Little Cecilia has not come to school. The family missed Sunday Mass. The post is piling up. So a few men from the hamlet, among them one Lawrence Schlittenbauer, go to the farm. They push open the barn door, and they find the 4 bodies piled up, covered with straw and an old door. Then, in the house, the baby and the maid. It is 3:30 in the afternoon. The investigation that follows is a disaster. Back then, in the Bavarian countryside, they do not know how to preserve a crime scene. Dozens of curious onlookers file through the farm. The bodies are moved. And a detail that is almost unbelievable: during the search, people cook and eat a meal in the kitchen of the murder house. All the evidence, any fingerprints, are trampled, erased. The Munich police, led by Inspector Gruber, do what they can. They establish that this was not a robbery. Money is found untouched in the house. So the motive is not greed. It is something else. Something personal. In their desperation, the investigators go so far as to have the victims decapitated and the skulls sent to Munich to be examined and even to be shown to clairvoyants. It will lead to nothing. And the suspects? There were many. The first is Lawrence Schlittenbauer himself, the neighbour who found the bodies. He was one of Victoria's suitors. He had even agreed to be recognized as the father of little Joseph. And that day, he opened the locked doors of the farm with a troubling ease, as if he knew the place perfectly. He moved the bodies without hesitating, and he is said to have let slip strange sentences that seemed to know too much. But nothing was ever proven. Another lead, Karl, Victoria's husband, the soldier killed in the war. Dead, really? His body was never found on the battlefield. What if Karl had come back? What if he had discovered the horror of what was happening in his home in his absence? The incest, the child. And then there were prowlers, burglars, former employees, brothers mixed up with paramilitary groups. More than 100 names. Not one certainty. 85 years after the killings, students at a German police academy take up the entire file again with modern methods. They study everything, and they reach a conclusion. All of them, independently, name the same suspect. One name. A single one. But they chose never to reveal it, so as not to stain the living descendants of that person. So the name of the Hinterkaifeck killer is perhaps known, but it too will stay buried. There is one last detail. Less than a year after the murders, the farm at Hinterkaifeck, now cursed, is completely demolished. And in the rubble, tearing down the attic, they find something. The mattock. The murder weapon, covered in dried blood. Hidden up there, in the attic. That attic the footsteps came from months before the tragedy. The weapon was there, right at the top. Above their heads. The whole time. And the skulls, what about them? Remember, the 6 victims had been decapitated to send their heads to Munich. Well, those skulls never came back. In the chaos of the Second World War, they simply disappeared. Lost. To this day, in the small cemetery where the family rests, the 6 graves contain no heads. Andreas, his wife Cecilia, Victoria, little Cecilia, baby Joseph and poor Maria lie there without faces. As if this case refused to leave them, even in death, a little peace. The case was officially closed more than 30 years after the murders. The last interrogations took place more than 60 years after the facts. With no culprit. 6 dead, 2 of them children. A family erased in one night. And a killer who slept among the corpses, then dissolved into the forest he had come from. So tonight, when you turn off the light, when the house starts to creak as it cools, and when you hear, perhaps, a light footstep in the attic above you, tell yourself it is nothing. The wood. The cold. An animal. Tell yourself that there are not, outside, in the snow, tracks that lead all the way to your door and never lead away again. Subscribe for more true stories. And you, who do you think was in the attic at Hinterkaifeck?